All right, well, hello and welcome everyone on this fine afternoon or evening, depending from where you're tuning in. My name is RJ Johansson. I'm a digital modern work specialist here at Microsoft supporting retail and CPG accounts. In the SMC corporate space of Microsoft. As a modern work specialist, I focus on everything within the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 stack. And I've been at Microsoft for almost 3 years, and I work out of the beautiful Fargo, North Dakota campus. I'm joined today by the always brilliant and talented Shay. Shay, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Shay Awojabi. I'm a Microsoft technical specialist as well, focused on the modern work stack, specifically the security compliance and identity workloads. I'm here to, help out with any types of questions, help unblock any technical blockers, and looking forward to a great webinar. I'll pass it back over to RJ.
Thanks so much. Well, let's move things right along and get things kicked off. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. All right, so quick rundown of the agenda. Today we're going to be talking about a very important member of the Microsoft Entra family, Microsoft Azure Active Directory, or Azure AD for short. We're going to start with an overview of Azure AD and review how it fits into the Microsoft Zero Trust model. Then we'll also look at how Azure AD can manage the identity lifecycle and access of your end users, internal, customer, vendors, etc. We'll highlight the benefits of a cloud-based Azure AD versus an on-prem Active Directory solution. And then we'll touch on SSO and MFA, all capabilities within the Azure AD solution. And that will lead us into a brief demo by Shay, and we'll close out with any questions from the chat if time permits. All right, so taking a step back here, we all know the world used to be a simpler place, right? Controlling digital access was relatively straightforward. You'd set up a perimeter and you'd only let in the right people. Now, that basic model is no longer sustainable. Organizations simply can't put gates around everything. Their digital estates are growing, they're changing, they're becoming boundaryless. It's virtually impossible to anticipate and address the unlimited number of access scenarios that can occur across an organization and its supply chain. Especially when it includes third-party systems, applications, devices outside of your organization's normal control. So identity is not just about directories anymore, and access is not just about the network. Security challenges have become much broader, so we need broader solutions. We need to secure access for every customer, partner, and employee, and for every network and device. And doing so needs to be simple, right? Organizations don't want to deal with incomplete and disjointed solutions that only solve one piece of the problem. They need access decisions to be granular as possible and automatically adapt based on real-time assessment of risk. And they need this to be everywhere, on-premise, in applications, websites, devices, and whatever's to come next. And that's where Microsoft Entra comes in and offers a complete and coherent solution. So a lot of you might already know that Microsoft loves to rename, rebrand our solutions. So if you're not familiar with the Entra name, no sweat. Microsoft Entra is a family of products that encompasses all identity and access capabilities. You can see that within the Entra family, there are several products along with Azure Active Directory, like Verified ID, Permissions Management, and Identity Governance. I'd like to talk about all of those today, but our focus is going to be on specifically Azure AD. If you want to learn more about the Entra products, though, we're going to be posting a link in the chat, and you can also reach out to your account executive or modern workplace specialist aligned with your account. So that link should be there in the chat momentarily. All right, let's take a closer look at Azure AD. So Azure AD, being a cloud-based service, provides a single identity system or centralized hub for identity management, authentication, and authorization. It connects with cloud-based and on-premise applications to simplify your management, tighten your control, and close critical security gaps. Very different from the on-premise AD model that's deployed and maintained on your local servers within your organization's own data center. Again, organizations are going to need to manage that hardware, software, updates, backups, etc. So how does Azure AD accomplish this unified approach? How does it do the things that we want it to do? Well, Azure AD simplifies management by providing a common identity for your users. It allows organizations to create and manage user identities, providing a single source of truth for user information. It supports user provisioning, group management, and self service capabilities for password reset and user profile management. We see greater control through securing access to applications, meaning your manager, or excuse me, you can manage your users and their access to any application in the cloud or data center across your hybrid environment from a single cloud portal. So managing legacy on-premise applications with Azure AD Application Proxy or with secure hybrid access. You can improve your control and visibility while simplifying the experience for your users. The final piece of this unified identity management that is Azure AD is efficiently managing external identities. So you can manage customers, partners, etc., with external identities in the cloud to deliver that flexible and secure access to apps and services such as your SharePoint Online or your Office 365 applications, in addition to any of those SaaS apps like ServiceNow or Adobe and your on-premise applications, SAP, Oracle, etc., enabling those users to bring their own identity for frictionless authentication. Mm. So as you can see, Azure AD can be that identity lifecycle management tool where you get your users um, in, whether internal or external to your organization, provision the various apps they need for productivity, whether that's in the cloud or on premise, enforce security and governance on those users and applications. This is actually a great place to transition to our next topic of zero trust, since you'll see identity is a huge part of that framework. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned before that we're living in this new reality, right? We can no longer believe everything behind that corporate firewall is safe, and we need a new principle. And that's where Microsoft's zero trust model comes in. And that zero trust model is built on three main principles: verify explicitly, use least privileged access, and assume breach. Azure AD plays a crucial role in Microsoft's zero trust model by providing that identity access and management capability to help enforce those strong security controls and enable secure access to resources. So when we talk about verify explicitly, what we mean is always authenticate and authorize based on available data points. That could be a user's identity, their location, their device health, their workload, etc. When we talk about using least privilege access, what we mean is limiting users' access to just enough access or just in time access to protect your data and productivity. Example of this would be for like an accountant within your organization at month end or quarter end, only allowing them access to certain reports at that time period, as opposed to allowing access throughout the entire fiscal year. Assuming breach is the final piece of the zero trust model. Really, this is a proactive security mindset that acknowledges the possibility of a breach occurring. So even within a trusted network or system, this is going to encourage organizations to implement security measures and controls that focus on continuously monitoring and protecting resources, even after attacker has gained some initial access. This is really shifting that security strategy from a reactive approach to a more proactive and continuous monitoring approach. With that, Shay, I think you're up next to talk more about authentication.
Awesome. Thank you, RJ. Now, for customers who are looking to start their journey in using Azure Active Directory, especially customers who currently have an Active Directory environment, getting that hybrid state starts really with two things. The first is leveraging the Azure AD Connector or the Azure AD Cloud Sync tool to synchronize your users, your groups, your contacts across both environments. The second thing and second step is determining what the authentication method will be. Now, knowing that every customer scenario is different, we provide different flavors, right? There's the pass-through authentication and password hash synchronization, which are both cloud authentication methods. We also have the federation. For the purpose of the webinar today, we will be focusing on the cloud authentication method, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But if you're curious to know what the federation authentication is about, that's simply where a process where Azure AD hands off the authentication process to a separate trusted authentication system, such as an on-premises Active Directory federation services, to validate the user's password. Now, for federated systems, typically it would require a more significant investment in your on-premises infrastructure, and a lot of the time are more complex to operate and troubleshoot. Now, for the cloud authentication method, however, we have, like I said, the pass-through authentication and the password asynchronization. Now, what are these? With pass-through authentication, what we're doing here is we have a lightweight agent that is being installed on your on-premises environment. So looking at this scenario, a user is looking to authenticate into Azure AD so they can get access into the various SaaS applications, Microsoft 365 applications, or even on-premises applications that they need for their day-to-day job. Before we can grant them access, however, the PTA agent, the lightweight agent that has been installed, would need to listen for and respond to password validation requests before that user can be granted access. What this means is there is still a lot of dependency on your on-premises environment. If there's any sort of downtime, that could potentially, of course, affect productivity. And in some cases, to ensure availability, you might have to install multiple agents as well. Now, that is pass-through authentication. With password hash synchronization, what we are doing here is we're synchronizing the hash of the hash value of the user's password into Azure Active Directory. So in this case, if this user is looking to sign into these various cloud applications or Microsoft applications or even an on-premises application, rather than having to validate the user's credentials on premises, we can work with that hash value within Azure AD to get the user authenticated. And what this means here is there isn't real-time dependency on your on-premises environment. You do not need any types of additional infrastructure to get this method rolling. Now, for both of the authentication paths, whether pass-through or password asynchronization, you can still get the benefits of the cloud. Right. Within Azure AD, we have what we call identity protection. And what that simply means is Microsoft is constantly working with security partners. We're constantly searching the dark web to identify credentials that might have been compromised, whether your username or password has been leaked on the dark web. We want to make sure that we can extend that to your on-premises identities as well. So if those users on premises have their passwords or their credentials compromised, we can create conditional access policies to enforce protection on them. So say have them reset their password or have them use an additional authentication method to confirm their identity before they're granted access. The other benefit that you get by using the cloud authentication method is what we call self-service password reset. So we want to make sure that we can take the burden of the help desk team from constantly having to reset the passwords of your employees and empower the end users, whether they're in the cloud or on premises, to reset their passwords by themselves, right? So that's another fantastic feature that you will get access to. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, these are great authentication methods. How do I decide what is appropriate for my organization? We have created this fantastic decision tree. It can look overwhelming right now. You do not need to memorize this. We will be sharing a link to this in the chat so you can reference it after. But you can use this link to kind of ask those important questions and determine what the right authentication method for your organization will be. Now, routing authentication through Azure AD as the control plane gives you full visibility and control into each access session, the resources that are being accessed, the conditions of that access. And to enable that consistent single sign-on experience for your users, it's important that you're modernizing your authentication. That is, confirming the user is who they say that they are. And this is the perfect segue to pass it on to RJ to talk through single sign-on.
Thanks, Shay. So with Azure AD, we make it really easy for your end users to seamlessly access the various applications needed for their productivity, whether it's that third-party SaaS application or on-premise application, without having to enter in their credentials every time they want to sign in. So with on-premise applications, Azure AD App Proxy is a feature within Azure AD that supports that SSO and enables users to access on-premise web applications from a remote client, which is going to remove that need for a VPN or reverse proxy. Using other credentials across multiple applications does come with risk, and that's why, in addition to centralizing this access management to applications within Azure AD, you would also be able to leverage its security benefits by creating conditional access policies, which also control how people get access into the various applications, ensuring you are verifying explicitly and assuming breach before granting access into those valuable resources in your environment. Um, Shay's going to do a great job of demoing the single sign-on process here in a minute. And since we've talked about SSO and we've talked about security, let's next talk about the various MFA options within Azure AD. So Shay, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, RJ. Now, our goal at Microsoft really is to help our customers achieve that zero trust framework, and we have designed Azure Active Directory to help exactly with that. Knowing that passwords are the weakest link in the security chain and a single point of failure without any additional verification, enabling MFA seems like a no-brainer, as it can help prevent up to 99.9% of identity attacks. And it is something that you should definitely consider turning on. We support a wide range of authentication options. We support the Microsoft Authenticator app, the Windows Hello for Business, FIDO2 security keys, and biometrics. We also support push notifications, soft tokens, art tokens, OTP, and of course the telcos with SMS and voice. Now, to enable multi-factor authentication, you can use either security defaults or you can use conditional access policies. For the purpose of this webinar, we would not be covering conditional access or MFA or the process of turning that on because we did a detailed webinar on that a few weeks ago, and we'll be putting the link to that in the chat so you can catch up on it. This now brings us to the end of the PowerPoint presentation. We will now be going into a technical demonstration of Azure Active Directory. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll be happy to take that for you. Now, here I am within the Entra portal, entra.microsoft.com. Like RJ had mentioned, the Entra family encompasses Azure AD permissions management amongst other solution stacks. But today we are focusing on Azure Active Directory. Now, for customers who are looking to start that hybrid state, like I mentioned earlier, we start that by using either the Azure AD Connect tool or the Azure AD Cloud Sync tool. So what does that look like within Azure AD? Here, we click into Azure Active Hybrid Management, Azure AD Connect, and it gives you visibility into what that environment looks like. What single sign-on method do you have single sign-on enabled? What authentication method do you have enabled? Do you have federation enabled? What does that look like in your environment? When was the last synchronization status? Things like that you're able to get visibility into. If you're also curious to know the health status of the Azure AD Connect tool, you can click on Azure AD, the Connect Health tool thing that I just clicked on now, and you're able to see if there are any types of synchronization errors, right? Do we have some duplicate attributes, data mismatch, all of that data you're able to find. You can also click on Sync Services, click into your domain, and it will give you visibility into the various domains that you have. If there are any errors there, is it healthy, is it unhealthy? So you can start taking steps to remediate whatever issues that might be present there. And that's pretty much how you can get visibility into your hybrid environment within the Entra portal, within the Azure Active Directory portal. Now, the first step with every identity and lifecycle management solution really starts with getting the users into your organization and into the IAM solution. So let's come real quick into all users and look at what that looks like. When we click on all users, we can see all the various people within our organization. And when we kind of expand this pane, you're able to see on-premises sync enabled. This will give you visibility to know if that user is a cloud-based identity or if that user was synchronized from your on-premises environment into Azure AD. For example, this top users here, we can see they have no, which means that they were created in the cloud. And we can see some were created on premises and they have yes to their names. We can see some mailboxes and a couple of other things here that have yes, which simply means that these users were created on premises and have been have been synchronized to the cloud. Another thing that you would see here, in addition to the on-premises identities, what we call guest users, right? So we can see here we have some guest users. And what this simply means is if you have some suppliers, some vendors, some third-party partners that you might be working with, you have the ability to bring them into Azure AD, into your environment, so that you can facilitate collaboration and enforce productivity within your organization, whether it's a social identity like Gmail, or whether it's an Azure AD environment, or even a third-party identity provider. You can bring them into your environment to facilitate collaboration. Now, let's talk a little bit really quickly about how to create a new user within Azure AD. We come here, we click on create a new user, and it's pretty much very straightforward, right? You define what the UPN is, you define the display name, the password. You can either also generate a password or put something there by yourself. You can also do you want this account to be enabled right now, or do you want it to be enabled at a later time? Once you define all of those pieces here, we go ahead and click next to properties. You can define the identity information, the job information, contact information, and of course, parental controls, right? What's the age group of this user? Are they minors? Is it an adult? Is he or she an adult? What does that look like? And you can, if the user is a minor, you can define if consent has been provided for this user or not. Another thing that you have the ability to do here is to define the user's location. Where is this person based out of? Such that when you're creating conditional access policies, you can enforce policies such saying that if this user is not signing in from the location that you have defined, you don't want them to get access, right? Those are the types of things that you have the ability to do within here. Next, we go ahead and assign them to either administrative units. So if you want to create a help desk team that is targeted to just the Canadian business or just the Nigerian business, for example, you can create an administrative unit and put them in that group so that it can manage that business for you. You can also add them to groups, whether it's a security group or Microsoft 365 group, you go ahead and do that here. And then finally, you can also add roles, like what roles do you want them to take on? Do you want them to be security administrators, billing administrators, whatever that might look like? You can go ahead and do that here as well. And once you do all of that, it's as simple as reviewing and creating, and you'll be good to go. Of course, we're not going to create this because I have tons of users already that we can work with. So we go back, you can, like I said, invite external users. So just third-party people that you might be working with, you can get them into your organization. But you can also do bulk operations. You can bulk create people, bulk invite people, and also bulk delete people. Now, earlier on, RJ and I talked about password reset. So let's walk through really quickly what that looks like in Azure AD. When you click on password reset, you can either enable self-service password reset for nobody. We don't want to do that. Or you can enable it for a select group of people or even for everybody within your organization. You then have the ability to determine registration methods, right? Do you want people to reconfirm the authentication information after a certain number of days? But importantly, you can define what the authentication method will be. When they're trying to reset their password, do you want them to get an email prompt or a text message? Or do you want them to use the Authenticator app? What does that look like? Do you want them to have just one authentication method? Or do you want one or more or two or more? What does that look like? You can define all of those things here. You can also do security questions. So right here, you have the ability to either use the predefined security questions within the portal, or you can also do a custom security question as it applies to your organization. That's something that is available for you today as well. All right, so let's go back really quickly and talk about the on-premises piece. So like we talked about earlier, you have the ability to enable self-service password reset for those on-premises identities as well. And here is how you do that, right? There is the part that you have to do when you're, setting up the Azure AD Connect tool when you're running through the prompts. But within Azure AD as well, you want to make sure that you're enabling password write back for those synchronized users. So when those on-premises users change their password in the cloud, we want to make sure we can write that back to your on-premises environment. Of course, still looking at the password complexities that you have on premises. We're taking that into cognizant, we're taking recognition of that in enforcing those policies. But you want to make sure that you can enable password write back for those synchronized users. And secondly, you want to allow users to unlock their accounts without resetting their password. We do have a detailed documentation that walks you through how to enable self-service password reset for those on-premises identities as well. Now, that is that we're creating a user and enabling self-service password reset for your users. Now, once you get your users in, the next thing, as we saw when we were creating that user, is to kind of think about the groups that they want to be put in. And that takes us to the next piece of that identity lifecycle, which is groups. Right here, you can click on New Group. You can either create a security group or a Microsoft 365 group, with a security group being one that is used for granting access to Microsoft 365 resources and also to make administration easier. A Microsoft 365 group is excellent for collaboration, making it easy that we can foster productivity across the organization, whether it's for internal employees or even external people like those partners or suppliers and whatnot. But the thing that I really want to call out here is the membership type, the ability to create dynamic user groups within Azure AD, users rather within Azure AD. So here, what we're doing is we're leveraging queries to say, hey, if this person, I'm hiring 100 people into my organization today. If this person meets so and so criteria, I want you to automatically add them into a group. Think about that. That can save you a ton of time and a good number of hours, right, for your IT team. So say, for example, we're hiring 100 people. They're in this department. They're in the finance department. They also have, a job title that is of this particular name. The first name starts with A to Z or whatever that looks like. You can automatically add them into groups. So it gives you the ability to scale as quickly as possible as an organization. So that's something that you can definitely take advantage of in your organization today. All right, so in addition to creating those groups, you're probably thinking about the security around the groups, right? Do you want those groups to expire if a user creates a group in your organization? Do you want this group to expire after a certain number of days or a certain number of months? You can define all of those things. You can say what's the group lifetime. Do you want to enable expiration for these groups? Those types of things you can design. You can also define the naming policy. If there are certain names you don't want people to use in creating those groups, you can block them. You can also have people do like prefix. If there's a name you want to come before the actual group name, you can define those sort of things here as well. And of course, there are general settings that you can use to say, hey, we want this, to be able to create this group with PowerShell or things like that. You can define within the Azure AD environment. All right, so we've talked about users, we've talked about groups. The next really important thing that we want to talk about is empowering these users and groups of users with the applications and the tools that they need to be successful and they need to kind of go ahead with their day-to-day jobs. And that takes us to applications. Right here in applications, when we click on a new application, you get welcomed into the wonderful Azure AD gallery that gives you where we have tons of thousands of applications already integrated. And you can kind of pick and choose if there's an application that you have today that you want to enable single sign-on for. All you need to do really is to search within the search bar here for the application that you're looking to integrate with, and you would find it, right? If it's not already integrated, you can also request for it to be integrated. But today, like RJ had mentioned, we have what we also call Azure AD Application Proxy. And what that means, as she has said, is to give you the ability to integrate those on-premises applications into your environment to enable single sign-on and, of course, to enforce security on those applications as well. But you're probably wondering, what types of applications can I integrate from an on-premises standpoint? Web applications that support integrated Windows Auth, header-based authentication, form-based authentication, applications that are hosted behind a remote desktop gateway. Those types of applications you can integrate into Azure AD today and enforce protection on them, meaning enforce conditional access policies on them, such that not only are you simplifying authentication, you're also ensuring that there is security on those applications as well. So that's something that you can take advantage of today. And when you come into this gallery, you can click on Learn about App Proxy, and it will take you into a documentation that gives you info on that. And we'll also be putting a link to that in the chat. All right, but for the purpose of this webinar, we will be walking through a single sign-on with specifically for Google Cloud. Like I said, you can integrate into third-party cloud applications, on-premises applications, and whatnot. Now, choosing a single sign-on method depends really on the application, on how the application is configured for authentication. Cloud applications can use federation-based options such as OpenID Connect, OAuth, and SAML. The application can also use password-based single sign-on, link-based single sign-on, or SSO can be disabled completely. For every application that you're clicking on within the AD gallery, you would see the single sign-on mode that is enabled. For Google Cloud, for example, or G Suite, we have password-based single sign-on, SAML-based, and link-based single sign-on. Another thing that you will see that is consistent across all the applications that are in the gallery is a link, a detailed step-by-step guide or tutorial that walks you through how to enable single sign-on for that specific application, right? So you will see that, as you can see here, all of that information is made available for you. And you can see that from A to Z, all the applications integrated in the gallery would have a documentation you can refer to as well. All right, so for the purpose of this webinar, just to save us time, I already enabled single sign-on in my tenant, and I'm just going to walk you through what the end user experience looks like. So let's go real quick into another tenant really quickly, if that will come up. 1 second. So here, all right, so here in this tenant, as we can see, G Suite has been enabled for single sign-on. I'll go ahead and click into it. Not only have I enabled it for single sign-on, I've also assigned the users and groups of users that I want to have access to this application. And you can see them here. Now, what I want to do is to test out what that end user experience looks like. For your end users, all they simply need to do is go to myapps.microsoft.com, and they will get welcomed into this portal that shows them all the applications they've been assigned to in your environment. For me, today we're working with G Suite, so I'll go ahead and click into that. And you see that I do not have to put in any types of password or any types of additional credentials again, because I'm already signed into the browser, I'm already signed in and authenticated. It gives me access directly into my Gmail environment, and I can go ahead and get productive in my day-to-day. Like I said, you can enable single sign-on for these applications, but you can also enforce security. So if you want to do a conditional access policy, you can do that as well within the Azure AD tool. Looks like my internet is a little slow, but basically this will come up with the Gmail environment, and you can go ahead and start being productive. All right, so let's go really quickly. Yeah, there you go. That's what it looks like. Let's go really quickly back into Azure AD and just talk through one more thing here. Now, within Azure AD or within the enterprise applications, you also have the ability to provision users automatically. So think about it this way, and for every application that is supported for, you will see that here listed as well, automatic provisioning supported. Now, this is particularly useful for organizations that have, think about you have an HR solution, and back to that, hiring tons of thousands of people in a day or in a week. You've hired 100 people, and you want to have them created within Azure AD. Rather than manually doing that, you can integrate your HR solution into Azure AD such that those users that are provisioned in the HR solution can automatically be provisioned into Azure AD as well. They can automatically be created, be updated, be deleted. So that entire identity lifecycle can be taken care of with Azure Active Directory. And this is available not just for those HR systems, but for any application that is scheme enabled and that has it stated within the Azure AD gallery as well. So that's
Hey,
something
Shay,
that, oh, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think your screen switched back from the G Suite.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and then share again really quickly.
Sorry, I
Sorry
didn't
about
mean to throw
that.
you off.
No,
Just
thank you
wanted
for
to.
calling up. Thank you for
Yep.
calling that out. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So like I said, automatic provisioning is available. That's something that you can definitely take advantage of in your organization today. All right, so we've talked about users, we've talked about groups, we've talked about the empowering them with the applications and making them those applications available to them. The next really logical thing we should talk about is security. But like I said, we have a detailed webinar that we did a few weeks back on conditional access and security defaults. Again, we'll reference that link in the chat. So instead of talking through that, we will talk through the next ideal thing, which is identity governance, right? When we think about identity governance within Azure AD, there are multiple layers to it. There is access reviews, there's privileged identity management, like RJ had mentioned, there's entitlement management. But today we'll be focusing on just two pillars for the sake of time. We'll be talking through access reviews and entitlement management, starting with access reviews. So if we click here into access reviews, it gives you the ability really to review the accesses of your end users, of your suppliers, your partners, people that you might be granting access to across your organization and across your tenants. So we've clicked into this, and it's really as simple as saying, hey, I want to create a new access review. I want to review either the applications, whether it's again an on-premises app, a cloud app. I want to review the accesses in those applications, or you can review the accesses within teams and groups. So Microsoft 365 groups, teams channels, and things like that. You can select the specific teams or groups you want to review, or we can just select, all of the groups with guest users. And here we're doing guest users only. You can also help that process by saying, hey, if this user has been inactive in my tenant for 40 days, 50 days, whatever that look like, I want to review their access as well. So kind of makes it easier for you to know who should have access in your environment and who shouldn't. Let's walk through what creating access reviews for an application would look like. So you select what to review, you select applications, go ahead and select the specific application that you want to review. I have Box, a third-party app, SaaS app. I have Demo app, which is an on-premises application in my environment. You can also select a bunch of other applications that you want to review. Go ahead and hit select. You can define the scope. Do we want to review the accesses for just guest users, or do you want to review the access for everybody in your organization? You go ahead and click on next again, and then you click, this is where you define what happens with the reviews. Do you want the specific user? So do you want me, if I was the one with the rights, do you want me to review my access? Do you want my manager to do that review, or do you want to delegate that to someone specific? Here at Microsoft, sometimes we go ahead and do our reviews ourselves, so that's always good. And then you can have a fallback reviewer as well. So after I review, you can have someone else do the review as well. Let's say in this case, we want the user to review their access. You can also define the duration, right? How long do you want this access review to go for? Do you want it to be done 3 days, every quarter, every month, annually? Do you want to have a start date and an end date? You can define those types of things here. And then you go to next. You can define what happens after the review is done. Do you want this access to be removed automatically? Do you want us to not do anything? Do you want to approve the access, or do you want to take recommendations? What would you like us to do? You have the ability to define that, and we'll pretty much listen to what you tell us to do. At the end of the review, do you want some people to be notified? You can define all of that here as well. And then also from an advanced standpoint, from an audit standpoint, you can say, hey, if, for example, my manager says, I need this person to continue having access. Do you want them to put a business justification on why I need access, especially if you don't think I do? You can go ahead and require a justification for that particular access review, right? So those are the sort of things that you have the ability to do. You can give additional context for the person doing the review, things like that you can do. But let's go back really quickly, and I would like to point out something here. In addition to doing single reviews, you can also do multi-stage reviews. So you can have one person do the first review, maybe the user do the first review, the manager do the second review, and then another person, a third stage, with someone else doing the third review. You can also say, hey, I want the second reviewer to see what the first person did, so that they can kind of use that to make a decision. You can do those sort of things. And of course, again, the process is the same. Specify how often do you want that review to go, specify how and what determines someone going into the next stage of the review, right? Is it only people that were approved in the first stage that should go to the second stage? things like that you can define within the Azure AD tool here. So let's cancel that. Go ahead and click next. Let's define the recurrence again. Once you define all of that, it's as simple as creating the policy and you're good to go. So that's access reviews and summary. The next piece that we're going to talk through really quickly is entitlement management. And this is really phenomenal for, again, for organizations that have those third-party people that you're working with, suppliers, vendors, partners that you're bringing into your organization. Say you're working with a partner and they're going to be doing a project for you for 3 months. And for that 3 months duration, you want them to have access to everything they need access to. Is it a SharePoint site? Is it a Teams channel? Is it an application? Whatever that looks like, you want to make that available for them from day one. And here is how you do that. You click on, access package, go ahead and give it a name. We're just giving it a fake name because. Give it a description, whatever description appeals to your organization and for the purpose of that project. Then define the resource roles. And here is where you kind of assign those groups, those channels, those SharePoint sites and whatnot. So let's say I want this person, this partner, to get access to HR information, right? Or to any communication that is being sent to this, email address. We can go ahead and select that. If there are some applications I want them to have access to, right? Whether it's Microsoft 365 apps or third-party apps, again, we can pick on Box, we can pick on, say, LinkedIn, right? Or we can pick on any other application, really, Salesforce. We go ahead and select that. And then finally, are there some SharePoint sites that you want them to have access to? Again, HR communication, sales or marketing information, sales best practices. You can go ahead and select that. Now, the fantastic thing about all of this is you can then define what roles you want them to take on. So in this group and team, do you want them to be members or owners? Do you want them to be users for those applications, for example? For the SharePoint sites, you want them to be visitors, members, owners. What does that look like? Within the app, do you want them to be marketing users, chatter moderator users? What does that look like really for your organization? You can go ahead and define all of that here. So let's kind of walk through that really quickly. Let's say this is a visitor. Let's make them visitors. The next thing you want to do is, how do people have access to this package? Do you want just people in your organization to have access? Do you want only the administrators to assign it? Or do you want this to be available for people in other directories, other domains that you might be federating with or collaborating with? Let's say this is for users in our organization. You can say for all users, including guests. You can make it for people just in your organization. Basically, you can get really granular on who should have access to this package. You can then define that when they request this package, for example, do you want there to be an approval process? And do you want a justification to be made? So from a compliance, from an audit standpoint, those are things that are really helpful. And you can define who should be approving this in your organization. You can require for there to be new requests and things like that. So let's say we're doing all members. And let's go ahead and just click next. In requesting for that access package, you can define what types of information you want to get. Do you want to get their names? There are some custom questions that you can collect. Are there some specific questions that you want to ask? Short text, multiple choice, long text. Those are things that you can define here. And then you can define that life cycle. How long should they have access to this package for? And that you kind of tell the integration within Azure Active Directory. So we're doing access packages, but it's also heavily integrated with access reviews, right? So if this user, we're giving them access for 30 days, we can review that access after 30 days and say, hey, do you still need access? And then extend the access or remove the access automatically based on the response that we get. So there's that tight integration across, our various solution stacks. Once you define the review here as well, it's as simple as defining, going ahead to create the policy, and you're good to go. And for those partners, those individuals, interns that you might be working with or pulling into your organization, this is a fantastic use case for them or fantastic solution for them that you can use to kind of scale and make it easy for them to be productive from day one. Now, we've talked through the major pieces of the identity and lifecycle journey within Azure AD. But one thing to call out is also the identity secure score to kind of round us up. You always want to know how healthy your environment is, how secure your identity posture is. And within Azure AD, under Protect and Secure, you get access to that identity secure score. The higher this score is, the better. In my environment, it's 62.3. It can definitely be better. And how do I know what I need to do to make it better? Here within, at the bottom, we can see some improvement actions. Within your tenant as well, you would also see this where we're giving you actions that you can take to make sure that your secure score is a lot better and higher. And you're also able to see the score impact. If I do this, for example, how is it going to impact my score? What does it look like for the user? Is it stressful? Is it low impact, high impact? And how tedious is it to implement this? You're able to get visibility into all of that information. And of course, if you want to see the score history, right, how is your environment trending over the past 60, 90 days? You can kind of filter through that here as well. Now that brings us to the end of our technical demonstration. I would now pass it back over to RJ to kind of round us up.
Great, thanks, Shay. All right. Well, we've talked a lot today. We've talked about a lot today. So, what are those key points that we really want you guys to walk away with? And that is really that Azure AD is going to provide that full-featured platform with capabilities for you to secure access for a connected world, right? On-prem, hybrid, in the cloud, etc. So Azure AD can help with those secure adaptive access, protecting access to resources and data using strong authentication and risk-based adaptive access policies without compromising your user experience. We're also going to provide a seamless user experience, providing that easy, fast sign-in experience to keep those users productive, reduce time managing passwords, and increasing your end users' productivity. We're going to be using that unified identity management, right? Managing all your identities and access to all of your applications in that central location that Shay was showing, whether they're cloud or on premise, to improve that visibility and control within your organization. And we're offering that simplified identity governance. So control access to apps and data for all your users and admins efficiently with automated identity governance to ensure that only authorized users have access. Now, if you're interested in Azure Active Directory for your organization and what the purchasing process would look like, the licensing structure for that, et cetera, please speak with your Microsoft account executive or modern work specialist, such as myself. If you aren't sure who your account executive is or you don't have a contact of that kind, there is a internal form you can fill out, called a Microsoft Contact Me request, and that link should be posted in the chat there for you as well. That brings us to the end of our webinar and conversation on Azure Active Directory. Like we mentioned, the recording will be sent out to those who participated and posted on our YouTube channel. We do have a few minutes remaining, so if there's questions in the chat, we will be taking those and answering those at this time. And if there aren't any additional questions, we can end the recording, but the moderators and Shay and myself will stay on here for a couple minutes.